Good evening. Appreciate everybody being here. Appreciate your patience as we go along here. We've been deeply studying about elders. I told Miss Carol if I had my way tonight, we'll finish talking about elders, we'll talk about deacons, and we'll move on. I've learned not to make plans, so we'll see how it goes. But that's the aim anyway. Tim, would you care to open us with a word of prayer?
Most holy and righteous Father in heaven, we're so thankful for the many blessings of the day. The sunshine that you've allowed us today, that we can realize your power and might every day. Thankful for the time we have now to assemble this midweek and study more of your word, that we might learn the things that we can do not only for elders but for all of us to better Christians, better students of your word, and be able to live a life that's pleasing to you and spread the gospel to those that we're around, that they can see you and us as the example that we can show. Ask you to be with Jonathan and all the teachers tonight, that they can present things in a way that we can easily understand, that we may be built up in the most holy faith. Father, be with those who are sick and hurting, be with those who have had surgeries. You ask your blessings upon them, that they can continue to recover fully, to be your will. Go with us through the remainder of the service, on through the uneven journeys of our life. We know that if we've been found faithful in the end, that we can inherit that home with thee. In Christ's name.
Amen. All right, so we've got a couple more categories, as we might say, about these different qualifications, and as we talk about each and every time, you know, when we think about these different, and again, I keep using that word because that's what we use all the time, but I want to get away from that. I'll maybe say characteristics, however you want to look at it. We always want to look at it through this lens of these three names, these three words, these three descriptors overall of what elders are, as overseers, as elders, as shepherds, those three Greek words that are used interchangeably, and I'm just not even going to try to pronounce those again tonight. But so again, thinking about those three aspects of the job, and we think about these qualifications, is certainly the lens that we want to view them through. What kind of men would be able to serve in these three ways, in these three roles? And so the next sort of category of these descriptors, these characteristics of men who would serve as elders, have to do with personal behavior and character. And you know, I think by and large these are pretty straightforward things. I don't think these are things that we have a particular issue with about the kind of behavior and character that a man who would serve should have. Lover of good, disciplined, self-controlled, temperate, not a drunkard. There's lots of different ways that gets translated, and not greedy. So in 1 Timothy chapter 3 is where we find a lot of these, and verses 2 and 3. Not given to wine, not violent, not greedy for money, but gentle, not quarrelsome, not covetous. And then in Titus chapter 1 and verse 7, for a bishop must be blameless as a steward of God, not self-willed, not quick-tempered, not given to wine, not violent, not greedy for money. Is there anything that jumps out at you about these things in particular? Well, again, I think, you know, we look at this, and we've kind of said this about all these things, but these are These are all characteristics that all of us need to be striving after. But I think the difference here is we are definitely looking for someone who exemplifies these things in their lives. Because an elder, someone who is going to be a shepherd of the flock, is going to be an example to be striven after by the flock that he is shepherding. If he has problems in these areas, then it's going to be a problem for the congregation to know and to see what to strive after. And I think these also relate to some of the other things we talked about reputation. How do you gain, the reputation both within and without of the church that you should have? Well, it's by displaying these behaviors, being someone who loves what is good, being disciplined. What does it mean to be disciplined? Okay, self-controlled, in control of yourself, not given to just whims and 1 week you're doing great, and 1 week you've spent all your money and you've done all these things that you regret, and then the next week you're back on the wagon. I think we think a lot about our diets. So often we're disciplined for a week or two. We can diet, we can exercise for a little while, and then the next week it's like, well, and so often we find that in other aspects of our life, whether it be our Bible study, whether it be other aspects of our spiritual life. Discipline and self-control, being temperate, being someone who doesn't fly off the handle, being someone who doesn't speak rashly, being self-controlled in the way that we interact with others and the way we behave in public and private. That certainly relates to how we deal with our families, relates to how we deal with those in the church. There are going to be conflicts. And for the elders especially, they are going to come in conflict with brethren who are contentious about things, with brethren who are going astray, whether it be in doctrine, whether it be in just their personal behavior. And they need to be able to not only oversee and discipline and correct, but also to pastor, to guide and to help in a temperate and loving way. And then the next one there is kind of the one that creates the most controversy. If there's anything we love to argue about in our modern time, it's alcohol. And so this gets translated in different ways, whether not a drunkard is one way that people translate it. What translations do you have of that? What are some other ones?
James is not given to wine.
Okay, not given to wine. Any other translations? Not addicted to wine. Okay. And so we get hung up on the phrasing here. We get hung up, well, if he can't be addicted to wine, but that opens up, well, he can do this, that, and the other. But I think we need to think about that and ask ourselves, why are we trying to justify this? Why are we trying to justify some level of alcohol consumption, and especially now? And there's a couple of things that we have to think about there, and we can go down all kinds of rabbit holes as we've well proven. But about this topic in particular, what does this mean? What is the context of it? And you can read a lot of things about what the context and the drinking culture and in the Roman world in the first century and all those. There's lots of different scholarship about that and what is he really trying to say. Some people will say, well, they drank wine that was watered down It didn't have much alcohol, or it even means, the word is kind of vague. It may even mean wine that's not even fermented. And I think whatever route you want to go with that, you're coming back to the same conclusion. The same conclusion here is whether it's fermented wine or not fermented wine, the behavior that it's talking about is an out of control, undisciplined behavior. Whether you're over, and it's well documented that in this day that people would drink to excess. They would have these huge drinking parties, and to see who could drink the most wine, and they would water down the wine just so they could go longer. And it was drinking for sport. So that is absolutely, whether it's alcohol or not alcohol, not temperate behavior. That's not self-controlled, disciplined behavior. That's not loving what is good. So coming back to the alcohol question, again, I would say, what level do you want to justify and say is okay, and why? And again, without getting into a whole big discussion about it, I just don't understand what we would be trying to justify and why. And we're going to try to get on over into the deacon qualifications, and what comes up there again is in the elder side it says not given to wine, and on the deacon side it says not given to much wine. So does that mean that the deacons can drink a little? Well, I don't think that really makes a lot of sense. I look at this next one: not greedy, not given to filthy lucre, not greedy for filthy lucre. Well, does that mean that you can be greedy for not so filthy lucre? What are we trying to justify when we start playing these word games, and we start trying to find these little nuances to try to say, well, this is okay because. I think we have to be very careful about the heart we're using to try to interpret these texts. Yes, sir.
When I read this, I thought it is odd that he randomly mentions not drunkard amidst all these other words you're saying here. And amidst this, it's kind of random. He doesn't put not fornicator, not sexual immorality. Where are those at?
Right.
Notice that's somewhat related to the other pieces of the list here. It looks like it's not really pertaining. Obviously, it's talking about alcohol, whatever, but it's an elder's main, one of the main goals here is just like you have to be very sober-minded. So you have to be very clear-headed to oversee a church, and very, very much always on the alert. They're the shepherd over the flock. Very hard to be on the alert when any part of this is a part of your character. So I think to me, that's more what he's going for. How can you be self-controlled? How can you oversee a flock when you don't have a clear head about you? Whenever you're forward about this, how you're doing this.
Absolutely. Find me one of these other qualifications. Because we have to look at these things together. Find me one of these other characteristics that alcohol enhances.
Self-control.
Right?
Yeah.
Find me one example, one argument where this is helpful. This will increase, X, and make that argument. I defy you to do that. And then I would defy you to read any of the current medical scientific literature about the health effects of even the most moderate drinking, and tell me what it is that you're seeking to enhance and seeking to improve in your life and your service to God, and how that makes you better qualified. Yes, ma'am.
Well, most people that I've talked to always answer. They like the relaxing effect. What was going through my mind is, I want to relax, of it. And I've been to homes at wine cellars. Like, I just think even with, I think Christians probably shouldn't be doing it either, period. I just see elders and are influenced, because most denominations, they understand that. Like with smoking, pot or cigarettes, period, they understand that.
Right, and you know, I think that brings up another great point, kind of what Ron said earlier. This is not an exhaustive list of all of the things you can and can't do. This idea of drunkenness, of debauchery, however you want to look at it, you know, that can go into a lot of realms, and you know, tying that to self-control and discipline. You know, there are a lot of things you can get into that are not quote unquote drunkenness, you know, whether it be drugs or prescription or otherwise, or whatever else you might want to talk about. You know, there are things that we can be involved in that show a lack of discipline, that show a lack of self-control, that Christians in particular, but certainly not those who would serve as elders or deacons should be involved in. Any other thoughts, comments about any of that?
How much? And it, so I'm kind of like you, I've not heard of it like this one. Well, how much can I drink and still be oh, as somebody other like holy and upright and respectable or faithful to the word. We're something out of the word and saying, well, I don't do this much.
I think it made me think of Kyle's lesson about modesty. You know, if our approach to modesty is how much can I get away with, you know, how little can I wear and still be okay, or how immodest can I be, and you know, that black box, you know, is like, well, where is the exact line that I can be at, because I want to toe that line. Or is my attitude, how modest can I be? How appropriate can I be? How godly and professing godliness can I be in the way that I dress and the way that I behave and appear to the world? That's a different attitude. And so, you know, again, when we talk about some of these things, you know, yes, maybe, as Paul talks about, yes, we have rights, but are we better to give up our rights for the cause of Christ than to demand our rights so that we can live how we want to live and just try to skate over the line into heaven? And then the last category here is how they relate to others. Hospitable, gentle, not lording. We see that in 1 Peter 5, verse 3. Not quarrelsome, not quick-tempered, not self-willed, and not violent. And again, these are all things that we should all be striving for as we relate to one another. But men who would be, and I think these qualifications really directly relate to that idea of a shepherd in particular, of someone who has a relationship with the church members, who is able to teach and to oversee, but to do it in love, to do it in gentleness and kindness, displaying the kind of love that Christ displayed. And Christ constantly amazed with his gentleness in even the most difficult circumstances when he had, in maybe in our mind, every right to be quick-tempered or upset. Well, those are the kind of men that we're looking for to serve in these roles. And I also think that, we see in a lot of these different things, just like being able to teach, being hospitable. What does that mean? Well, that means a lot of different things. Being hospitable, that doesn't mean just that, we have people over to the house. That can mean a lot of different things, whether it's helping people with various things, whether it's just spending time with them. It doesn't always have to be like, we've made this huge meal. It can be coffee. It can be a glass of water. It can be simple things to show that you care, to spend time. We all know people in our lives that, just try to pick up the check. I dare you. And that is a form of hospitality. And an important one. Yes, ma'am.
And being genuine about it, as in 1 Peter 4:9, showing hospitality to one another without grumbling.
Mm.
So it's not I did a good thing,
Right.
and then turn around, walk out the door, and say, man, 2 hours that I could have been doing this at home.
Right. Yeah. No, absolutely. All these things are things that we need to be willing and desirous of, not grumbling about or doing out of necessity. We should certainly be. All of us should be hospitable in that way, but we certainly want those who would serve in these roles to have that attitude.
Not to expect
Mm-hmm. Right. Giving without the expectation of receiving is the essence of hospitality in many ways, and so often we get in that trap of, well, they did this for me, so I've got to go find something to do for them. Well, that's great that you want to be that way, but don't be that way just because someone did something for you. Be that way because you want to be with them, because you want to spend time with them, because you want to grow closer to them. Absolutely. And again, elders are going to deal with contentious issues. They're going to deal with problems that need to be dealt with in gentle ways, but firm and in ways that are founded in authority from the Scripture, not self-willed. The rule of the elders should not be, we're going to do this way because it's what we think ought to be done. So we're going to do this way because it's the plan and the pattern that God has set before us. And because we have searched the Scriptures to understand what God's plan for the church is, what God's plan for our lives are. And when you bring us problems, that's how we're going to approach them. Not violent. I think that speaks for itself. Any questions, any comments, any additions to any of these?
Didn't become thing all at once. Over a long period of time with a lot of experience.
Absolutely.
When they got older, got experience. You have an elder that comes in, he's a little weak in one area, he can grow, be very strong in that area.
Absolutely.
Just a matter of information sometimes. Cause you to change your mind about something. You had a reason to come to this Bible study. You wasn't going to change your mind about a few things or grow where you learn something you didn't already know. Maybe a motivational do better than you have been doing. Maybe start doing something that you should be doing all along, but you didn't.
Right. Yeah, as we've talked about through all this, we can grow elders. And that's the reason that they are, we don't appoint 22-year-olds to be elders. Because raise your hand if you were more patient when you were 20 years old than you are now. Unless you're 20 years old right now. I don't think I see anybody here that age. I mean, I can think back at some of the impatient, quick-tempered, just absolute stupid things that I did. And looking back on it, it's embarrassing. I mean, stories you wouldn't even want to tell because they're just shameful. And certainly, as we grow older and we grow wiser, and hopefully we do those things, we can grow into the kind of person who can oversee, who can pastor, who can be the dignified elder presence that is needed to lead the Lord's church. All right. So again, those three things sort of encompassed by all the different qualifications we've talked about. And as soon as I hit this button, we're not talking about elders anymore, okay? All right. We made it through. No, if there's anything else we need to talk about, we can. But I don't really, when I first looked at this, I thought, man, I don't know why we lumped elders and deacons into one lesson. And then when you stop and look at it a little more, you're like, okay, well, I kind of understand because these lists are very similar. And these lists overlap quite a bit. And that's really interesting to think about when we think about these two offices. But we read about the qualifications of deacons in 1 Timothy chapter 3, beginning in verse 8. If somebody would read 1 Timothy chapter 3, verses 8 through 13 for us.
Same way, deacons are to be worthy of respect, fear, not indulging in much wine, and not pursuing dishonest gain. They must keep hold of the deep truths of the faith with a clear conscience. They must first be tested, and if there is nothing against them, let them serve as deacons. Same way, the women are to be worthy of respect, not malicious talkers, but temperate and trustworthy in everything. Deacon must be faithful to his wife, manage his children and his household well. Those who have served well gain an excellent standing and great assurance in their faith.
Okay, thank you. So the word deacon comes from the Greek word diakonos. Our word in English is a transliteration of this word. Interestingly, the word as used in the scripture is translated different ways in different contexts. Translated as servant, minister, or when talking about more specifically this office as deacon. Thayer defines it as one who executes the commands of another, especially of a master, a servant, attendant, or minister. And I just added this verse here because you read and get into a lot of the different organizations of different churches, and you see the way that roles and things have been changed, and the waters get muddied by a lot of tradition. Philippians 1:1, when he addresses that letter to the saints, along with the bishops and deacons, he's making something a little bit clearer there that there are three separate groups of people there, that bishops and deacons are offices in the church, and that they are separate in some way from the saints, that some may try to argue that the thing we see, the role we see of deacons is not really any kind of an office. It's just, anybody can do that work and minister in that way. And that's true to an extent. There are lots of things that anybody in the church can do. But there is a God-ordained office of deacon for men who serve at the direction of the elders, or the bishops, whatever you want to say, to carry out the work that needs to be done within the church. I found this, I love a good Venn diagram. I found this one online, and I didn't make all these transitions. I didn't know they were in there, so we're going to have to cycle through that. Don't know what was trying to be emphasized with any of that, but there we go. So I stole this from some website, and I thought it was interesting to kind of put it in this Venn diagram and see the overlap as well as the separation. Because again, as we've talked about all through this, these are not checklists, and I don't want us to think that. But I think it's helpful to look at the things that are mentioned for one and not the other, as well as the things that are mentioned for both. And the things in the center there are the ones that overlap. The one wife, respectable, dignified. It says they're not a drunkard, not addicted to wine, not a lover of money, not greedy, manages household, manages children. Those are sort of very related type of things. A lot of them are that sort of that family relationship, and we talked a lot about that in the discussion on the eldership. That this is a proving ground of sorts. This is how we see how you handle conflict, how you handle other people, how you raise your children, how you teach, how you deal with problems, your reaction to a lot of different things. That's where we see that, and that's where we see you grow in that. Certainly one who is just starting out in those family things, whether it be marriage, raising kids, there's a lot of adjustments to make as you go along through those things. And we see how you grow in that and become someone who is self-controlled and sober-minded and able to teach and a lot of those various things. I think it's interesting the things that aren't mentioned for deacons. Anything stand out to you that's on the elder list that's not on the deacon list? Right, and a lot of those things are related to the things that are on that list. And I think he may have missed a little bit there, whoever made this. Certainly the deacons should be above reproach in a lot of ways.
There is a big one there, Jonathan. It is somewhat. So I guess it shows once again how sure deacons can prove they manage their house and their children well, but it doesn't appear that a deacon has to have a Christian yet.
Yeah, so that qualification is a little less specific, we might say, and of course that we would expect probably a deacon to be younger and perhaps not their kids, not yet adults, maybe in the process of that training. I thought it was interesting that being able to teach is not specifically mentioned. And again, should deacons know the word? Should they be able to talk to people about the gospel? Absolutely. But I kind of thought, is that one of those things that where deacons maybe don't have to have as much responsibility in teaching, that maybe they don't have the ability or the gifts of preaching or standing up here and teaching Bible class or doing some of those more public things. But being a deacon presents an opportunity to do a lot of other work within the church. Now, again, that is not to say that deacons don't have to know the Bible, that deacons don't need to be able to talk about the gospel or anything like that. But perhaps someone who would serve as a deacon who's maybe not as comfortable in those roles, that it is an opportunity for them to serve in that office in different various ways that maybe they aren't qualified, maybe they aren't quite ready to be elders. Yes, ma'am.
I went back and read Acts 6 where they named 7
Okay.
and he used that they would be waiting on tables. And to me, it's more physical, doing the physical things in the church that makes it, move the, like, what does Thomas do? The electrician. You see what I'm saying?
I do.
It's the building maintenance maybe, or the technology, or the sound, things that help and assist in the worship service, but not so much the teaching. I was going back by, they were actually administering to these widows on a daily basis this money that they were giving them so they could meet their physical needs, the widows and orphans in Jerusalem in Acts 6.
Right. And people will debate whether or not that those men were truly appointed as deacons of the church. People will argue about that. I'm not interested in that argument tonight, and because we have 5 minutes left. But to your point, and I think we have to be very careful about looking at the deacons only as physical servants, because anything we do in the church should be done in a spiritual context. So why were they serving those widows?
Because they love and care for their fellow Christians.
Absolutely. And so those widows had a physical need, but they had a spiritual need too. And the lack of concern for their physical need was going to have and was having an effect on their spiritual needs. Yes, sir.
And just to add to that point, there in Acts 6, they had specific physical duties to take care of. That spiritual work would not be interfered with.
Absolutely.
And two offices, I appreciate how you started that out. Deacons, role of deacon is not elders in training. Two separate things.
Right.
It's two separate things. Elders have a job of the spiritual oversight for sure, as do we all in Matthew 28. We all have the opportunity and the obligation and to go teach. There are also other things that have to be done so that services won't be hindered, and so that the spiritual growth can continue. Electric outages, Ms. Carroll said, or we have plumbing problems, or this car wreck thing can't get here. I mean, there are physical needs, sure. I mean, there are plenty of individuals outside of the deacons, but physically the deacons have added burdens, sacrifices, and opportunities to take care of.
That's a great way to put it. Burdens, sacrifices, and opportunities. And to what you said, the work of deacons, just like the serving of the widows there in that specific situation, that was work that needed to be done. That was a physical need that needed to be taken care of, need to be organized, need to be handled. Because there were true widows who were in need, and somebody had to, they were being neglected. They were being neglected because of, for lack of a better term, racism, some kind of a sort of disdain toward their background, and so that needed to be handled. Did the elders need to do that?
That was the point of appointing the deacons.
Right.
They needed to be teaching and spreading the gospel.
Right. There was all this other spiritual work that needed to not be hindered, as Sam said. And so the elders said, look, here are some faithful men who can handle this. And there are lots of things within the church that need to be handled. There are lots of different avenues of work that goes on that a lot of us never even see. And it goes on Monday and Tuesday and Thursday and Friday and Saturday and Sunday and Wednesday as well. And it's work that needs to be done. Yes, a lot of times it is physical tasks, but I think the qualifications and the characteristics we see of deacons tell us that it's work that needs to be done with a spiritual mindset of service, of an attitude toward our brethren, toward the church, toward Christ, and toward the eldership, that let us bear this burden so that this other work isn't hindered, so that more important spiritual work can continue unabated, and let us serve in the ways that we can to do that.